What does strive mean to you? Well, we're going to find out what it means to Scott Amyx on this edition of the 1004 show. Scott is quite the guy. And I think you're going to learn a lot about him, how he got to America, which is a pretty crazy story himself. He grew up without a father, and he still went on to do big things like a speaking gig at $20,000 a hit, and that's pretty incredible. He's the author of Strive, How Doing Things Most Uncomfortable Lead to Success. And that's pretty true, do uncomfortable things, guess what happens? Good things usually happen. So, what are some things in your world that will make you uncomfortable that could potentially lead you to that goal that you want? Well, we're going to learn about how to do it today with Scott. Roll it. Define success.
Zach, that's a great question, and I'm so glad you're starting off with that. Well, success, most of us kind of defaulted to wealth or monetary success, but I think success, to me at least, is something that defines you from a span of your lifetime. Meaning that, I'm of the belief that we didn't just come to being on Earth just so we can consume. So what is your ultimate meta impact on this earth? And it's about making sure that you're having the biggest impact before you demise, right? So success is ultimately about pursuing the things that's going to maximize your value to others. So for me, my success is about helping the world. And the way I do that is I bring sustainable economic development to regions and nations by using new technologies, and particularly exponential technologies, to bring about fourth industrial revolution. So that's what I do.
Love it. I think the word success is so interesting. I do, a bit of consulting and talking with people, and they're like, "Well, what are the successful businesses that you've worked with?" And I'm like, I think we have to define that every single time, because success to me could be helping someone not make a huge mistake. And even though that doesn't necessarily have that money value associated with it, you made it so that they didn't go into that money mistake or something like that. And so success is something that is such an interesting word, and I appreciate your definition of that. I've heard you talk a couple of times and use the word getting people uncomfortable so that they can see different results, or the results that they're ultimately kind of going for. When you talk about being uncomfortable, how can someone start to train themselves to start a new habit to do that uncomfortable when they might have like the cold chills for it, or they just absolutely despise being uncomfortable in that scenario?
So I'll give you two examples. I'll give a simpler example first. Years ago, I was deathly afraid of being in public. If you went to my LinkedIn account, it was a Scott and then capital A period for my last name. And I didn't have photos of myself on social media. I didn't use social media really for all purposes. So for somebody who's very uncomfortable being in a public view, to do what I do on a daily basis, which is to share and to influence and to give thought leadership across the globe, is something that is very uncomfortable. And it may seem like right now this conversation that we're having feels very comfortable for me, but it's not, because I'm not by nature very extroverted. So it takes a lot of intentionality on the emotional intelligence side to present myself in a way that's engaging, that's captivating, and put myself out. And I tell you, when I go on stage in front of tens of thousands of people, I get nervous. My palms get sweaty, and my heart starts palpitating, and I don't want to go up there. But I tell myself, I have something so important that this message is worthwhile, that I have to deliver it. So I really see myself as a messenger more than anything else. So that's one example. Another example is I do tend to cover a lot of technologies and transformational innovation. So after I give a talk on a particular topic, let's say robotics or AI, for instance, it's not very uncommon for the audience to kind of whisper or murmur under the breath that I hope this never happens, or at least, by the time it happens, I'm dead or I'm retired. So that's kind of the natural reaction that we get, in terms of change. And what I have to say about that is, here's the thing is, if you watch the movie Hidden Figures, where the human computers, the secretaries that were doing the calculations, were about to get replaced by IBM mainframes, the natural reaction for most of us is fear. Oh, those autonomous vehicles. Oh, those robots. Oh, that change, that organizational change, or whatever it is. But what I would tell you is the ones that tend to resist the most are actually the first ones to go. I mean that. Rather, just like in the case of Hidden Figures, it was a supervisor who actually went to the library, taught herself a programming language, and eventually ended up teaching her colleagues and became valuable. And then she started to work together with machines. So, step number one is recognizing that there is a natural resistance to change, and then write it down. Write it down that you have the resistance, and then be very intentional. And this is where it's not just habit, but it is literally stepping way outside of your boundary of comfort zone and doing something that is hard. Now, it may not be taking a huge leap initially. Let's try something smaller, right? So let's say you're working full time, and you know that there are big changes, and you don't want to get laid off because you happen to be in a particular division that's supporting old technologies or old services. You know you need to start learning new things, whether it's AI, blockchain, cryptocurrency, whatever it is. And you're just busy. All of us are busy, but you make the time. You be intentional about enrolling in a particular class, maybe a Singularity University, and saying, I'm going to learn something new to evolve and change myself and challenge myself.
Really good. So it's really taking control of the scenarios in your life instead of allowing them to control you. Is that a good way to say it, you think?
Absolutely. I think most of us, they tend to, it's kind of that fight or flee type of a mindset where we just kind of acquiesce and say, I can't do this. And what do? They just go back into the same cycle and watch their TV, sit on their sofa, and gripe. And what I'm saying is, actually, the thing about the concept that I share in my book, Strive, is that it is available to everyone, which is very unusual because usually most success methodologies require that you are highly intelligent, you're highly motivated, right? Or you come from an exceptional background, or you have some gifts that is just uncanny. But what I'm trying to tell you is that if you're willing to exercise even just a little bit of that discomfort, you will find yourself in ways that you can't even imagine, right? So I'll give you an example. I'm a Tribeca Disruptive Innovation Fellow, and the story there is that I was invited one year, and I attended. I didn't know anybody, and after the award ceremony, I attended a workshop. It was on robotics and AI, and there was about 30, 40 people in the workshop. I didn't know anyone there, and apparently there wasn't a facilitator. So what did I do? I stepped up. And I decided to actually facilitate the session that I didn't know anyone. And I did know that they were professors. I did know that they were CEOs of big industries and CEOs of major startups. And here I am, old little me, that's facilitating this group. Well, that eventually led to me becoming a fellow. And then this year, I actually nominated a friend, and he became an honoree. So my point is, by just taking a little bit of courage, just that little extra step, it opens up new opportunities that frankly would not have been available before.
One of my favorite things to do is this: raise your hand, right? Raise my hand. And so every big event that's ever happened in my life was not on like a list of to-dos, or it wasn't that next thing. But because I raised my hand, it happened. And I think oftentimes people will get jealous of people who are successful. And it's just like, well, you didn't raise your hand. That person did. That person is doing uncomfortable things. And I think I see, stuff that you're doing is very similar to that. Like just at like that event, no one was running it, so yeah, I'll run this course, I'll run this workshop, whatever. I mean, and now look at it. So tell me about Strive. Like, how long have you been working on it? What was the genesis of putting it together?
Well, first of all, Zach, I want to say thank you for sharing that point about just raising your hand. I think it's about showing up. So, for example, I am very introverted, so I don't like to go to social parties or gatherings. It's very uncomfortable for me. But one of the things I have to do, number one, is actually go there. And then when I'm there, to make sure that I'm fully present, and if there's an opportunity, to your point, Zach, to raise my hand, say, look, I'm willing to give it a try. I don't know what the result's going to be, but let me give it a try. And many times, that actually translates into incredibly opening up new ways of looking at the world and intersecting. I mean, I am not exaggerating when I say that I'm 1 degree away from the most powerful, influential people in the world. And it's because I continue to raise my hand over and over again. Coming back to your question around Strive was written based on my life experience. So if you read some of the primer on my book, is that I'm originally from South Korea, and I grew up during the time period where it was after the Japanese colonization, and then they left after World War II, and then it was the Korean Civil War. And most people are familiar with North Korea and their nuclear arsenal. So it was a lot of devastation and a country that was war torn. And in the 1960s, the GDP per capita was literally in just a few $100s, and it was poorer than most African countries at that time. So to come from that to becoming a OECD G20 nation was everything about the fact that half of a peninsula did everything under their possible control to disrupt themselves and do the things that was most uncomfortable. So that's kind of the backdrop of my story. And then throughout my life, I've had a lot of incredible hardship, but I've turned those hardships into building character. And I took those character and pushed it forward. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. I didn't have a lot of the opportunities or contacts or network or wealth. I had to do everything from scratch. And I remember in my 20s and 30s, I used to think there was a white knight on a horse. And it turns out that there is no such thing. It has to be you. It has to be us. And that's why I wrote this book, because what I realized is instead of always trying to look outside for those opportunities or those chances or those saviors, it is us. We have to be willing to do it. And the more we raise our hands, the more chances we're going to get.
I love it. I really do it. So there's a saying kind of on this topic where, or there's a Bible verse or something like that. I can't remember what it is, but it's something where there's a flood, and this person is on top of their house, and they keep praying to God, saying, "Hey God, please save me." And God brings like 3 different scenarios of people to save this person, but it doesn't look the way that person expects it to. They expect to see that white knight, basically, and instead it looks a little differently. So they keep going by, even though they were going to rescue this person. And ultimately, this person dies, goes to heaven. Then he talks to God and is like, "Well, why did you let me? Why didn't you bring anyone?" And he's like, "I did 3 times. You just didn't take the opportunity." And I think oftentimes people think that it looks a specific way. You've probably seen the chart that says, "This is how my life is going to go. This is how my business is going to go." When really it's a crazy roller coaster. And so I think people should raise their hands more, like you're saying as well too, and be open to just saying yes, so that you can see where that opportunity takes you. You can always say no at a later time when you recognize, oh, this really isn't for me. But if you don't raise your hand, someone else is going to, because they're taking your advice, my advice, to figure that out. So how long did it take for you to come up with the title?
It was very interesting. I was actually very fortunate that Wiley, the publisher, actually reached out to me. I had contributed to technical journals and publications before, but I wanted to cut more into mainstream. And as I was thinking about different topics, in terms of AI, robotics, all these things, this topic around success and how to, kind of buck the trends and have a contrarian perspective came up. And I wrote it in terms of the abstract and pitched it back to Wiley, and they accepted it. They loved it. As far as the actual construction of the book, many months of research. If you read the book, you'll find that it's a blend of beautiful stories, lots of different stories and history from different perspectives and genres, as well as real life experiences and case studies that infuse it and makes it very concrete. So later on, I'll talk about some of the framework methodology that Strive is based on as well.
Very cool. Um, I just or am wrapping up a book myself. It's called Anomaly: How to Finally Stand Out from the Crowd, being published by a publisher as well. And what's interesting about that is I wasn't really thinking about writing a book necessarily, but an opportunity kind of happened, and the whole process is obviously longer than you think it's going to be. So, how many months total do you think it took you to get it from kind of concept to them final copy?
I have to say, I think most of it was really research. So easily 6 months just spent on just going to the library, going through secondary research, doing primary interviews, to make sure that I had this large arsenal of content, research materials I can fall back on. And then the actual writing and the editing took another initial draft about 3 months or so, and then went through many more months of revisions. So the whole process took about a year, a little bit more than a year. But I'm actually pretty pleased with it. I think it's a kind of book where it's easy to digest, it's entertaining, it's valuable. There's something very specific around how to that can be applied right now. So I think it's met the objective of what I was hoping for.
Love it. Looking forward to checking out. I've heard you use the words disrupt ourselves. We need to disrupt ourselves to hit the goals, to accomplish the things that we want. How can someone start today to disrupt themselves?
Beautiful. So I'll give you several examples. All my life, I've been, lifting weights. That was kind of my natural way to, deal with stress in life. And one of the things, if you know much about lifting weights, is that the way you build muscle is by actually tearing the muscle fiber apart. And then the new muscle fibers that grow on top of that, and that grows the density and the mass. So in a way, when we exercise or lift heavy weights, we're effectively destroying or tearing apart parts of a body, and it's rebuilding. And that's really what I mean by disrupt, is it literally forces you to do the things that's so uncomfortable. It kind of puts that little knot or maybe a big knot in your stomach, but you do it anyways. Okay. So let me give you one example of that. I have to get endorsements for my book, and I could have easily gone to my personal contacts and get friendly endorsements. That would have been helpful, but not really move the needle. But in addition to that, I started to reach out to my contacts to get to the next layer of contacts. So I was able to get endorsements from Tony Robbins. I was able to get endorsements from Forbes and Singularity University and Tribeca Film Festival. I couldn't have got those if I didn't, reach. And I tell you, some of those emails, some of those calls, some of those meetings I had to have, I literally was shaking. It's so nerve-wracking putting yourself out there. But you know what? You do it anyways. And you take a deep breath, you wipe the sweat off your brow, and you do it again. You do it again.
One of my favorite lines from Hidden Figures, because you talked about that earlier, is we all pee the same way, or all of our pee is the same, something like that. And it's kind of like that. We're all human, right? And so at the end of the day, like, yes, we're uncomfortable, but that person is also human. You have amazing endorsements. Tony Robbins, Forbes, I saw, and a couple others. Walk me through one of those scenarios of how that actually went down.
Well, I tell you, I was contacting not just well-known people. I was contacting tier 0.1% of society, and it was very nerve-wracking. Sometimes it was through a referral. Other times it was just outright cold. But I was willing to do it, and I'm executing. I just execute. And that's the thing is, despite the discomfort that I'm having and the nervousness, and frankly, when you put yourself out, people are nervous about rejection, right? I have those as well, but I did it anyways and just kept going. And that reminds me of another example, which is early on, one of my first, job out of grad school was in financial services, and I was never in sales. I was on the retail side of financial services, and of course I was naturally very shy, but I again put myself in that discomfort, and I kept on pounding away. And after a few months, I was number 7 in terms of production in the entire country. I mean, that's kind of the mindset of what Strive is all about. Is no matter what it is, school, work, relationship, your personal growth, you gotta stretch yourself. You gotta do the things that's uncomfortable and in many ways scary. And if it's not scary, it's probably not big enough then.
Hmm. How do you know what's too big in that case?
Well, first of all, I want to be very practical. You can't, if you don't know how to ski, you can't just start going down the black diamonds off the mountain. You have to start incrementally. So it's about stretching and exercising your muscle. Strive is a muscle. So if you're if you have two choices, which is to do this or not to do this, and you feel more uncomfortable having to do something, then you know that's the right choice. Okay? And you do it because you can sense that anxiety, whether it's meeting new people, whether it's applying for a new job, whether it's starting a new career or a new relationship, you do it anyways. And that's kind of how I make my decisions is what's easier and what's harder. Instead of defaulting to the easier status quo, choose the harder, but make it incremental.
Love it. Seen you charge $20,000 to $40,000 for a speaking gig. How did you come to the conclusion, or how did you start understanding that you are worth that much? Because I think people hear that number and they're like, "Wow, that's a lot of money." How do you figure that out?
Well, let me give you the backdrop. In order for me to be where I am today, I've had to put in 4 years of cutting my teeth. What that meant was I spent my own money investing, actively submitting speaking proposals, pitches, presentations, speaking at every possible venue all around the world at my own cost, and continue to develop thought leadership, write, contribute, and so forth. 4 years of investment. So the fact that I can charge a kind of a value to my speaking engagement is a reflection of the value that I bring. Because now I have a portfolio, because people can see when Scott's speaking, there is substance, there's a practicality, and then he, of course, infuses it with this kind of corny, ironic jokes as well, which makes it kind of fun. So the value of that is really more of a benchmark in terms of markets, but it's also the fact that I was willing to do the things uncomfortable. When I was starting out, Zach, I didn't want to be on stage. It was uncomfortable. But one thing that I knew is years ago when I was sitting as an attendee at conferences, I would say to myself, does that person on stage that's presenting, does he or she know more than I do? And are they delivering value to me and others? And oftentimes I felt that I could actually do that. And that's what I would challenge all of you that are listening, which is when you're in a position on the receiving end, whether you're in an audience, whether you're a student or an employee or in a managerial position, ask yourself, could you do that better? If so, I challenge you to go ahead and do it. Become a teacher. Move up. Get promoted. Try for a different position. Do the things that's most uncomfortable for you.
Love it. Can you tell me one of those jokes? Or do I have to pay, do I have to pay you $20,000?
I think in my TED talk, I talk about the fact that when I was in Korea, and I tried to get A's in my classes, but I can't get better than C's because apparently I was copying from the wrong kid. So these are the kind of silly jokes that I tell personally.
That's pretty good.
But actually, there's a little story behind that, which is I actually contacted the comedian writer behind Saturday Night Live and David Letterman, and he actually published a book, and I actually spoke with him on the phone. So he actually has a how to make jokes. It's mostly for late night, but I literally spent the time deconstructing in terms of how to actually create associations, create cognitive dissonance, and what's that kind of creative spark that creates jokes. Still working at it, but hey, you got to give it a try, right?
It's a good first joke. I mean, that was pretty funny. How did you get to America?
By boat. No, I took first class. No. um, we had some relatives in the U.S., so we were sponsored by our relatives. But I came when I was 10, and it was in 1980s. And the backdrop was that uh, South Korea is actually a very young democracy. So the presidents that we had during the 70s and earlier part of 80s was still very, I would say, kind of dictatorial. So during the 80s, there was a democratic movement by college students that were protesting and demanding that we become more of a democratic nation that was transparent, open, and allow for people to actually vote and have their preferences, be acknowledged by the government. Well, that process took the lives of many young people. And what's interesting is that today's president that's in control in South Korea came from that generation of college students who protested for greater democracy. So I was coming from a very volatile background, and really back then, the prospects for me in Korea was dismal because we still had to pay for education, and I just didn't have we didn't have the funds for it. And coming to the U.S. was really kind of one of our only viable options, at least from my mom's perspective, to give me an opportunity that I may not have had. And I jokingly say that if I stayed in Korea, most likely I would be working in some interesting position. But I'm very fortunate to be here, and I love America. I love the values of America, and wherever I travel, I can say that I'm a very proud American citizen.
That's awesome. You grew up without a dad, is that?
Yes,
And when you came to the States, your mom came with you or no?
she did. Yes.
So, I grew up in a split family. And so I haven't lost my dad or anything like that. But what do you think from that scenario, living in kind of without a father, has helped you learn about life that you've kind of learned now in kind of your business?
Well, let me share a story first, which is years ago I went to a men's camp as part of church. And what was very interesting at the men's camp was many of these men that are your typical, kind of macho, man, big muscles and so forth. But many times what we found out was that they were actually quite vulnerable. And they felt that the absence of their father, whether they're literally absent because of divorce, or in some cases absent because the father chose to be not very active, or in worst cases, some of their fathers were actually physically abusive. So they had a very skewed perspective of father, and that was also affecting their relationship with God and how they viewed father or God. The point of this is that many of us, especially in this day and age, come from fragmented, broken families of different sorts. And no longer do we have this beautiful, intact nucleus family. And what I would say that is, it's about choice. And those circumstances are very legitimately difficult. But we have a choice in terms of what we do with that. Now, I've seen people around me, whether it's foster brothers or others, where they've chosen to go down the wrong path. I've chosen to, again, do the things that's uncomfortable and make the best of it. One of the things that I committed early on is I wanted to have a healthy relationship. This year will be my 20th anniversary with my wife. She's my college sweetheart. I've been very intentional about practicing and making sure that we had a holistic, intact family. And I can say that I've been incredibly faithful to my wife. I love our children, and I wanted to give them something that I was missing all my life. And the other point I was going to say is that even though I didn't have a father for most of my life, the father figure that I was able to look to ultimately came from heaven. My heavenly father became my father figure. So people ask me, well, how do you know how to, raise your kids? And I say that you're so patient with your kids, and you're so loving, you're so, you're so understanding, you're so mature about it. And I said, I learned it from my heavenly father. He's the way he taught me. So I don't look at it as a disadvantage, but I think if you look at great people in history, They come from broken families. Abraham Lincoln, he was left abandoned with his sister when he lost his mother, and his dad had to go find a new wife. Um, Bill Clinton, Obama, a lot of these people have very interesting broken relationships or dysfunctional relationships with their fathers in particular. We use that to build character. We use those hardship to strengthen and to develop resolve. One of the qualities that I developed in my lifetime is I'm not the smartest, I'm not the most attractive or handsome or articulate person, but one thing I do very well is if I fall, I will get back up. If I fall, I will get back up over and over again, and that is a skill, that is a muscle that I've been exercising.
Yeah,
You can
get knocked down 7 times, get back up 8. You constantly got to get back up. I love that. You talked about how you were an author in a lot of technical books, or you were being recognized from a very technical standpoint or something very specific, but you wanted to have more of a worldwide or a global or open up your brand to the masses. At what point did you understand that was something that you wanted to do, and what are some of the strategies that you've used to start doing that?
Well, I'll tell you, Zach. I remember specifically, I've been doing a lot of conferences for some time, and I remember going to, I'm not going to mention the name, but it's a blue chip company, and I was an influencer with that blue chip company. And in these social events, I was getting to know other influencers, other thought leaders. And what I saw was that these people who are in past their 50s and 60s, they have written a number of books. They're speaking, they're doing some consulting on the side. And then I saw that and I said, well, that's going to be me in about maybe another 10, 20 years. And I made a conscious decision, which is there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I saw a different version of me in the next 10, 20 years that involved impact on a global scale. And for me to have that impact, I needed to get out of my niche, again, being uncomfortable, to something that's broader. So if you look at a lot of my media coverage and press, I will talk about everything from parenting to fashion and men's wallets. It really doesn't matter. I'll cover anything. But I want it to be more broader appeal so that I can connect with people. Here's why. When I go into regions and nations throughout the world, whether it's Colombia, I'm going to Costa Rica soon, whether it's Czech Republic, whether it's Serbia, whether it's China, Korea, whether it's Saudi Arabia, UAE, it doesn't matter. The point is that we are at a very pivotal point in human history in terms of hyper automation and intelligence, cognitive intelligence. And it is both an opportunity, but also a responsibility. And I'm telling you that institutionally, whether it's the governments, whether it's existing industries or the investors and the workers, they're all resisting. They're all resisting change. They don't want to switch over from oil and gas to solar. They don't want to switch from traditional legacy hardware to cloud. They don't want to switch over from centralized to decentralization and decentralized autonomous organizations or blockchain. They don't want to. I'm going to a conference for PTC called LiveWorks, talking specifically about how robotics are becoming collaborative, agile, decentralized, and autonomous, working together with humans. Yet the resistance is very much there. And so PTC had asked me in particular to address the elephant in the room, which is when we put hyper automation, what does that mean for my job, right? So my point of this is that we're in the midst of a massive transformation, both good, but also some externalities we have to address. But if we are not willing to address some of those discomfort on an individual basis, how are we then going to address it in a community or tribal or organizationally or regionally or nationally? To bring about change, it starts with us. We have to do the things uncomfortable and buck the trend, the natural tendency to stay with status quo. Let me tell you, what has status quo done for Toys R Us or retail stores? You look at the newspaper, there are literally dozens and dozens of retail stores, brands, Where are they? Bankrupt, sold in pieces, right? Divesting. It's because they waited and waited, resisting, hoping that the Amazon, the e-commerce, change in consumer behavior and expectations would not affect their business, but it did. They waited too long. And I'm telling you, that same retail destruction that is happening at a shopping mall, at the retail center, at the city level, that's affecting commercial real estate and everything else. That is going to happen in financial services. That's going to happen in transportation. That's going to happen in smart cities. It's happening, and it's going to happen on a massive scale. And the only way that you as an individual and us are going to be able to adapt is if we choose to be proactive. Because if we just waited, hoping for the best, guess what? You're going to be the first one to be asked to leave.
Yeah, 100%. I use the term innovate or die. I was reading an article recently, obviously Toys R Us going through what they're going through, and how Amazon is basically taking over their warehouses, or they want to. Hey, we killed you, and then by the way, but it's so interesting. Like people are like, "Oh, I don't know how to compete with these people." It's like, well, you're just in Toys R Us's case. Like I haven't been there in many years, but like they don't even do customer service good anymore. Like there's all these. It's no wonder people are going to Amazon instead of somewhere else, because they are really focused on customer service, really focused on efficiency, and other people are just like, I don't know what to do. And then $1 billion business goes under. So when someone is talking about, being proactive in that case, are you looking for the people that are on the left side of the bell curve, or can you move those people from the right side of the bell curve over? Like how do you convince these people who are timid and afraid and don't want to be proactive?
Yeah, that's a million dollar question. And from my experience, what I've seen is that sometimes it's age specific in terms of generational divide, but then sometimes I think it's more of a mindset. So in other words, you may have somebody who's in their 30s and still be resistant, and you may have somebody who's in their 60s and who may be very progressive. So it's looking for, I would say, the people that are most likely to switch over in terms of thinking and their processing and the way they view the world. And it's the people that are seeing proactively, if they don't take a class here or there on these new forms of services, business models, or technologies, that their skills are going to become outdated, right? So I think it's those people that I'm hoping to reach out to through my book. As far as those staunch late adopters that are resistant to change, there's nothing that we can do about them, unfortunately. And they are very much, in many ways, the ones that's in control of government, in control of many industries, in particular family businesses. And we'll have to wait for the next generation to come up.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a short little clip going around from the Facebook Supreme Court trials, where there's a lot of the older congressmen, I guess, that were asking questions like, what's your business model, or like, how do you make money to Facebook? And it's pretty funny that these people are leading our world, our country, yet they don't even understand how the internet works. It's just interesting, I guess, in that case. What do you gonna say anything?
No, go ahead, please.
What do you do for fun?
What I do for fun? Well, I love to spend time with my family, and we've added a new addition to the family. So we've been telling our kids, you have to be of a certain age and responsible before we get a pet. So after almost 14 years, we finally got a small dog. So they're delighted. And so our family has grown. We've transplanted from Silicon Valley to New York City, tri-state area. And we're loving spring here in New England. And it's just absolutely beautiful. So for me, it's about being in nature. And that's something I learned from Scandinavian countries is every Sunday, as a family, they take a walk in the forest. And there's something incredibly just rejuvenating and that kind of centers you to the core by being in nature. So the things that I enjoy, I would say, is coming back into the core. So it's working on my faith. It's working on my body. It's working on my mind. It's working on my relationships. And when those things are strong, then everything else becomes productive. And that's what I would urge all of you is that we have to look at life holistically. Years ago, I used to abuse my body, work 10, 12 hours a day, and eventually led to herniated disc. And it's not worth it. What is the point of having a higher net worth if you lost a relationship, or if you jeopardize your health, or you're just frankly not even available to even spend money? I have friends who are investment bankers. They just have so much money, but they don't have the time to actually spend it.
Hmm. Crazy. What is Scott Amyx? Did I say that right?
Amyx.
Amyx. I was close. I was close. What are you best in the world at?
I am best known for crystallizing the next 3 to 5 years out and how the economy, how the industries, how the consumer behavior and the technologies are going to get manifested. And I have a degree of precision that is very, 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 I intentionally say 3 to 5 years out so that it's still very tangible and within reach. So this is part of the reason why several years back I spoke on decentralization, and sure enough, Internet of Things became very big. Last year, we focused on quantum computing. That's a little bit further out, but we think that's going to have a major impact in terms of transforming everything around computing and mobility. And now we're focusing on decentralized autonomous organizations, which basically means in the near future, we don't need Facebook, we don't need Uber, we don't need Amazon. We're going to be having a secure method of working with each other in a fully decentralized peer-to-peer model where you don't have a profit center or an intermediary that sits in the middle. So I see things and I'm able to articulate things based on fundamental research and industrial best practices and be able to pinpoint it in terms of where the opportunities are, where you should be making the investment, and where you should be applying your efforts and time.
When do you think that stuff's going to come to fruition?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about.
So the decentralized kind of place where we don't have the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Ubers of the world.
So that is starting to happen for a number of reasons. So one of the things that needed to happen was Internet of Things had to become more ubiquitous. So meaning you need to have more nodes, intelligent nodes, computing edge devices that are more prolific within the home, in the car, in public spaces. And as those devices become more intelligent, meaning the CPUs, the GPUs, the SoC chips have computational power, storage, can run localized AI as an example. Now you have the computational power or the nodes. And then the Internet of Things then connects it, allows for orchestration, communication, data sharing. And then you layer the artificial intelligence on top of it for predictive analytics as well as resiliency, adaptability, right? And then you start to infuse that with blockchain that allows for encryption methods in a decentralized fashion. So once these building blocks start to mature, it starts to not only bring new technologies, but it fundamentally challenges our existing business models. So the model of shared economy is going to become that of decentralized shared economy, peer-to-peer. And so in other words, if you're paying $20 for an Uber ride, the future is going to be same set of services, seller and buyer, but you may be paying $5 because you don't have a central entity that controls it in between. Future organizations and corporations may not even have the traditional founders or management team. You will have an operating model, and it'll be self-organized, self-governed, and it will actually pay for its own expenses. So it's very interesting, and it's a kind of transformative aspect that if you are not in tune, you find yourself quickly out of that world. And one of the concerns that I have is the AI, at least the way we define weak AI, is very specialized and very niche. But the concern is over time, as the cyber physical capability holistically become richer and richer, more of the functions will become automated, right? There will be many new jobs, clearly, for those that can adapt. And those are the ones that I'm talking to, the ones that are willing to adapt. But then there are going to be segments, smaller segments of the population that are not willing to adapt, that are not willing to practice the methodology of strive. So they find themselves displaced. They become part of the growing populism and nationalism movement because they feel like they're left out of that economic prosperity. That's going to lead to further unrest and instability. And that's exactly what I'm trying to address through my work, both from pushing the envelope around exponential technology, but also trying to address some of the externalities. And again, I don't think that the answer is things like universal income. There's something more fundamentally that is more sustainable that I call the human currency that may be able to help address some of those aspects.
Tell me a little bit about the methodology, the framework of Strive.
Absolutely. Um, Strive, STRIV, stands for the methodology, and I made it incredibly simple and practical. So S in Strive stands for set a goal. Before we can forge ahead, we need to know where we're going. Uh, so what I would challenge you, the listeners, is that when you set that goal, it has to be more than just about yourself. In the book, Good to Great, Jim Collins talks about level 5 leadership. And it's about leaders who have a greater purpose than just themselves. So when you make and set that goal, you got to be looking for a bigger picture, a guiding light for the rest of your life, not just that next year or two, but for your whole life. And it's got to be more than just about money, fame, or glory. Number 2, T in Strive stands for think about how to get there and plan for success. The difference between those who realize success versus those who just have big dreams is about execution. And you can't execute if you don't know the incremental steps that you need to take. So in order to achieve this, you need to break down your lifetime goal into decades, then monthly, then weekly, and that everything that you're doing on a daily basis, big and small, has to get you closer to that long-term goal. Number 3 is R in Strive. R stands for risk. You got to embrace it. That's what we've been talking about. And this is by far the hardest for most of the listeners. You know what you have to do, but it scares you. It creates this anxiety, right? This fear. Maybe it's having to speak in front of a large group of people. Or maybe it's taking your savings and investing into a new business. Or maybe it's changing career or going back to school. Whatever that hard thing is for you, you have to take that first step. And it's only when you stretch yourself that you begin to make huge gains. Number 4 is I in Strive, which stands for insights. What did you learn from your uncomfortable change? It's about self-awareness. The only way that you can ensure that you're progressing in the right direction is being intentional about self-examination. Maybe you tried something, maybe you failed, right? And it made you uncomfortable. But you got to figure out, what did you do? What insight did you gain about yourself? And figure out what you learned by taking those risks and continually tweaking your approach the next time you try to strive. Number 5 is V in Strive. V stands for verify progress. How do you know that you're going in the right direction? Just like we have to check Waze when we're driving, the GPS, you have to verify your progress. Your progress meter has to be quantifiable and tangible in terms of the way it demonstrates that you're in fact moving towards that ultimate lifetime goal, right? And finally, number 6 is E in Strive. E stands for enhance yourself mentally and physically. Like I said before, our journey to success has to be holistic, and you have to constantly acquire new knowledge and expertise. In addition to sharpening our minds, you got to also consider your physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. For instance, I start each day with the Bible, I exercise, I meditate, and then when I sit down to work, my mind is clear and productive. So when I interact with people, I'm at my best. So we have to think holistic. Don't try to slave your way into success by neglecting your body, your relationships, or your emotional or spiritual needs. It just doesn't work. So here's my call to action, which is, regardless of how you choose to define success, like we talked about in the beginning, most of you want more success out of life, right? Whether it's for ourselves, kids, or for a greater purpose. But how are you going to make an impact in the world if you're going to be spinning the same circle, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results? So I challenge you to do the things that's most uncomfortable. You have the opportunity to realize great success. And it's available to everyone. And I wrote this book intentionally for everyone. And for anybody that's interested, I'd be happy to give them a free VIP sneak preview of chapters 1 and 2. And I'll provide that information to Zach. That'll be available on the site.
Love it. So how do people find more about you? Where's the book? Where can they find it? Stuff like that.
Absolutely. All they have to do is go to Google and type in my name, Scott Amyx, Amyx,
We'll
and
make it
that's.
even easier. We'll put it in the show notes. Anything else that I have missed or that you like to talk about?
Zach, I'm just thinking about what you said, which is we have to be active. We have to raise our hands. I think our pop culture teaches us to be passive, passive in the movie theater, passive at home, passive at school, passive at work. No, the way you live life is becoming active and become an active participant. Raise your hand, speak out, become a change agent. Don't look to others. You are it. Just like the Bible example you provided, the Savior is not out there. The Savior is you. People often ask, what's the role of Christians? The role of Christian is if there's a problem, if there's a need, we have to address that need for others. Not looking for other people. And we can do that.